Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends. And if you didn't get a chance to watch the Star City Games Dallas Open this weekend and see the new standard meta firsthand, well, we got you covered. We're going to talk about the results of that tournament and talk a little bit about the Star City Games Dallas Classic standard tournament as well, which is a smaller tournament, but there were a couple interesting results there too. So quickly before we get into the deck lists and all the new Ixalan cards that are seeing play, I just wanted to make a quick reminder. If you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to help support the channel and what we do. You will find a link to our Patreon page there, as well as some product links for things on Amazon. If you make any purchases there, we get a small percentage back. And then finally, Flipside Gaming has offered a promo code for our viewers, so definitely check that out if you have a chance. With that being said, let's get into the information for today. And we're going to start off with the top 8 deck list for the Star City Dallas Standard Open. And as you can see here, a lot of interesting things going on. A lot of big changes, as you would expect, with rotation and new set coming in at the same time. So first off, congratulations to the Jessup brothers. Andrew and Dan did awesome first and third place with Sultai Energy. We'll take a closer look at that deck list in just a second. Ramen and Eberle, guess what? Still there and still good, coming in second place. And even though you don't see any more in the top 8, there were quite a few in like top 16, top 32. So Ramen and Eberle not going anywhere. Blue-white approach of the second sun, starting to feel more consistent and actually having great finishes in 4th and 5th place. 4-color energy came in 6th and 7th place. A little bit of a variant on Sultai Energy, but we'll take a look at both those deck lists. And then rounding out the top 8 was Esper Gift. So Godpharaoh's gift decks are back and they're doing pretty well, actually. So again, we'll look at all these deck lists in just a few seconds. So let's just jump in with the winning deck list first. The one that came in 1st and 3rd, Sultai Energy. And here it is. So Sultai Energy deck, it's not too unusual. I mean, it's pretty standard to things you've seen in the past. Nothing super surprising, but it does get a small infusion of some cards from Ixalan, especially in the sideboard. So I wanted to highlight some of these Ixalan cards quickly. I also want to point out, gets a copy of the Scarab God, another card that's been hot recently, and for good reasons. This will not be the only deck list where you see the Scarab God show up. Hostage Taker, though, is the big card from this deck, and a couple others, as you'll see as we go through, from Ixalan. Running 4 of these, the card's just plain phenomenal, and it makes sense. I mean, if you're in these colors and you're running a strategy where this is going to be helpful, which is probably going to be most strategies, Hostage Taker is going to be an awesome card for you. So this card really looked good this weekend. It's been spiking already in the secondary market, and it's kind of interesting since the Pro Tour has been pushed back a little bit now with this Ixalan season, that I think a lot of people are putting more stock into what happens in Star City Games Open as to what their personal metas and their game stores will be looking like over the next few weeks. They're not waiting for the Pro Tour. So you're seeing a faster response to prices of some of these cards. That definitely happened this weekend with Hostage Taker. And we'll be doing a video tomorrow to showcase all of those changes. But at least for today, know that, yeah, Hostage Taker had a pretty good weekend. The cards that came out of the sideboard that we saw from Ixalan, Spell Pierce and Duress, okay, maybe not a surprise there. I mean, we know they're great reprints. They've seen plenty of standard play in the past. No reason for that to change. Deathgorge Scavenger, a card coming out of the sideboard to deal with some of the graveyard shenanigans like the Esper Gift deck. And then Vraska Relic Seeker. Really good card coming out of the sideboard here in certain matchups. I'm kind of curious to see if maybe more decks main deck Vraska in week 2, week 3. I guess it just depends on how comfortable they were with her performance out of the sideboard. So that'll be one to watch. All right, let's move on to 4-color energy. Very similar to the previous deck list that we looked at, but there are some differences as well. You're going to see less of an influence from Ixalan in these particular deck lists, especially out of the sideboard. Again, it's just probably more preference than anything in week 1. People are not wanting to take a risk. Other people more willing to take the risk on new cards. So it'll be interesting to see week 2, week 3, like where the sideboards shake out, how much Ixalan gets in there. But I think that question will be answered pretty quickly. Now, before we move on to the new Ixalan cards in this deck, I do want to point out a couple things. 2 copies this time of the Scarab God, 2 copies of Chandra, Torch of Defiance as well. So 2 very hot cards that will probably continue to be very hot, especially as the format evolves. So a couple ones to keep an eye on. But what came out of Ixalan? Well, we got Rootbound Crag. So that was really the only main deck card that we saw here. And Rootbound Crag, though, is going to be the first of many check lands you're going to see in some of these deck lists. And out of the sideboard, Spell Pierce was the sideboard card, which again makes sense. Spell Pierce is amazing. Okay, Ramen Red. How different is it? Well, not that different. Basically, the big change here is Lightning Strike. Lightning Strike's awesome, makes this deck even better. This deck is really good anyway, so not too much for me to say about it. You're probably very familiar with this deck and what this deck can do. It's quick. Lightning Strike makes it quicker. Pretty awesome. All right, let's move on to this blue-white approach deck. So basically, this is a control deck trying to win with Approach of the Second Sun. Before we move on to the Ixalan Spotlight, let's look at some of the other cards in here. I do want to point out Gideon of the Trials, 2 copies in the main, 1 in the sideboard. So this card has been climbing recently as people have been preparing for this new meta, and it stands to reason that Gideon would be a good control card. I mean, there's Azorius modern control decks that are running Gideon and actually having success with the card. So Gideon does a good job of controlling the board, completely fits into a deck like this. Other than that, you're just looking at a control shell. I mean, things you'd expect to see. You got 4 Supreme Wills, you got to pull from Tomorrow to help you get through your deck, and you have your Fumigates to deal with things on the board, Censors, Castouts. Yeah, it's a pretty just hard control deck. Let's look at those Ixalan cards in here. Settle the Wreckage shows up. Now this one, 3 in the main, 1 in the side, in conjunction with Fumigate. I mean, this deck can sweep the board, that's for sure. Now, this one's a little more conditional, of course, but you could argue that this is still a good card if it's a forecasting cost Path to Exile, which sometimes that's what it is probably. Might be good enough in a control deck. And this card is definitely one to watch as we move forward, I think. Another card that almost feels tailor-made for this deck, Search for Escanta, which turns into Escanta the Sunken Ruin, just helps you be more consistent with both your control as well as getting through your deck. Then when it comes to lands, Field of Ruin is here. It's a little conditional, but it can lead to a shuffle effect if you need one, and you also get a Glacial Fortress here. And out of the sideboard, we get Slash of Talons, so this was pretty interesting, but again, it makes sense in this type of deck. Alright, what about the Esper Gift deck? So God Pharaoh's Gift deck has had a pretty big overhaul. You're going to see some of the core pieces still here. Angel of Invention, Champion of Wits. I mean, those are great cards that saw a nice little spike when this deck originally hit the scene last meta. And as it started seeing less and less play as time went on, those cards began to go down. It'll be interesting to see if they start to bounce back. There's also a lot of really good Ixalan cards in here to keep an eye on. And you're probably noticing them already as we're looking at this list jump out at you. So let's just jump in and see what they look like. And yeah, Chart of Course, it's going to help you populate your graveyard. Completely makes sense. Seeker Squire Exploration is going to help you populate your graveyard. Why not explore, right? So this totally makes sense for 2 casting cost. Hostage Taker's back again, and it's awesome. And finally, Vona Butcher Amagan. There was a lot of talk about this card. I was one of the people that said that I think this will see standard play. A lot of people said don't think it's good enough for 5 mana. But here's my thought on this card initially. Maybe if it was a full robust meta and nothing was rotating out, it might have a hard time crossing over. But when you have Ramen Red in the format and you have a more narrow fields of cards to choose from, this feels like a really good card to me. And it seems like it's performing well so far. We'll have to see if it stays in this deck build over week 2 and week 3. As far as lands go, you get Drowned Catacomb as well as Glacial Fortress for check lands. And then out of the sideboard, couple big cards here, Duress and Vraska's Contempt. This won't be the last time we see Vraska's, or Duress actually. Great sideboard cards, and Vraska too for some decks is definitely a main deck option. Alright, let's look at a couple decks that didn't top 8, but I just wanted to highlight them because I thought they were interesting. Black-Green Constrictor, this is a classic deck that's been around now for a while, so I wanted to just look and see how it adjusted to the rotation to Ixalan. And it's not too different, but there's a couple interesting things to point out, if nothing else here. Now, in some ways, this feels like a variant in some of the energy decks we've already looked at, so you're not seeing maybe a lot of drastic changes here, but a couple cards I did want to point out from Ixalan that made the cut. Walk the Plank, 4 of those in the deck. 4 Ripjaw Raptors, 2, and then Carnage Tyrant even makes it in here. The reason I wanted to point that out was, first off, Walk the Plank is actually great removal, even though it does have a condition based to it, and it's a sorcery, and it's 2 black. Feels like it might be clunky, but you know what? I think it's a really good card. The other 2 dinosaurs, they don't have to be in dinosaur decks. I mean, they can work out in a deck like this, or any kind of deck running green. Actually, you could probably run these two with some fair success. Now, you might be wondering, since I mentioned dinosaur deck, what happened to the dinosaur deck? Well, we'll talk more about that in just a second. But before we jump over there, let's look at the sideboard. And again, a lot of the sideboard cards we've already seen. Duress, Vraska's Contempt, Deathgorge Scavenger, and Vraska Relic Seeker. All right, let's talk about that dinosaur deck. Red-green dinosaurs finished in 45th place. Ouch, right? So here's the thing, I think, going up to week 1. Initially, everyone was really high on dinosaurs, trying to brew it. Then a lot of players started thinking, maybe Samut would be good in the deck. We started seeing some brews with Samut. This one actually did run 2 Samuts. Then as we got closer to the actual weekend, a lot of people started second-guessing this deck, feeling like it wasn't that powerful or powerful enough, that maybe Samut was good, maybe Samut wasn't, which build do you use? They started kind of questioning the deck just generally, and I think maybe a lot of people backed out and changed their deck selection. That's very possible. Now, for this deck to do well in this meta, it's going to have to probably go through some changes, and maybe it doesn't work out in this meta. Maybe we have to wait for the next set and see what it gets there. That's entirely possible. But at least week 1, it didn't really look that strong. It didn't look like a lot of people were running it. I feel like just more people were running just things like Ramen Red. They're just more consistent and tried and true. And, that's not unusual for week 1 necessarily. So maybe, who knows, maybe this bounces back week 2. We'll have to kind of watch and see. But as you can tell from the deck list here, this deck has the most influence from Ixalan. And let's just jump in and look at these cards. In the main deck, you're going to find Otepec Huntmaster, Carnage Tyrant, Commune with Dinosaurs, Deathgorge Scavenger, this time in the main, not out of the side, Drover of the Mighty, Ripjaw Raptor, Savage Stomp, and Regisaur Alpha. So probably the cards you'd expect, right? I mean, a lot of fantastic dinosaur cards here. As far as the mana base goes, you get a Rootbound Crag as your check land. And out of the sideboard, there was a Rampaging Ferocidon, and Vance's Blasting Cannons, which transforms into Spitfire Bastion. I thought that was an interesting inclusion here, and this is another card I kind of want to watch. It's a little bit awkward in a fast red deck, but maybe in a mid-rangey red deck at some point, or a deck that's trying to go a little bit bigger. I feel like this could be interesting. All right, let's talk a little bit about the other tournament, the smaller standard tournament this weekend, and that's the Classic. Now, the Classic takes place on Sunday, where the Open takes place over the course of Saturday and Sunday, so it is a smaller tournament, and a lot of times you see vastly different decks do well between the Open and the Classic. This time around, it wasn't too different. Maybe that is because we have a smaller card pool to choose from when it comes to the meta, but you'll see a lot of the same decks here. 4-color Energy. You do have a Ramen Red. Actually, you have 2 Ramen Reds. You're going to have Esper Gifts, Sultai Energy, and other 4-color Energy. So a lot of the stuff we've already talked about. But 2 other decks which did well. First off, congratulations to Zach Ilsick. His Grixis Improvise came in first place. And there's also a Grixis Control deck I wanted to mention. Now, both these decks didn't top 8 the Open, of course, but they actually still performed pretty well in that tournament. They're definitely going to be contenders in the future. So let's take a quick look at them. Okay, here's the Grixis Improvised deck list, and it actually looks pretty sweet. Okay, first thing I want to point out, you don't see a ton of Ixalan influence here, a couple cards which we'll talk about in a moment, but this is an improvised deck. The pieces for this deck have been around for a while, it just never really was good enough to break into the meta. Now with the more narrow meta, it's getting its chance, and the deck actually looks super sweet. I mean, look at some of these cards in here. 3 Tezzeret the Schemers, I mean, that's awesome. You get the Scarab God, one of those. You even get 4 copies of Herald of Anguish. This was a card that when it came out, a lot of people were speculating it was going to be a big standard card. Never quite found the foothold. Well, here it is. The improvised deck finally coming together and looking really amazing in this meta. So it's just running a lot of powerful spells that we're pretty familiar with just generally, all the way down to Fatal Push, which I should mention Fatal Push because it is showing up in a lot of these deck lists too. But as you can see here, you're probably familiar with most of these cards. They're coming together in a new way, in a new meta, and they're working together incredibly. So let's look at the Ixalan cards that are supplementing this. We'll start off with Sorcerer's Spyglass. Now, this is a copy in the main as well as a copy in the board, and I mentioned when this card was spoiled that maybe this is a card you can main deck because of the fact that you get to look at your opponent's hand, you'll know what deck they're playing, and if you even can't figure out the deck they're playing by what you see, know what's in their hand. But this card in the main in this particular deck actually makes a lot of sense, because even for some reason you don't feel like that's always going to help you in game one, then you can still tap the thing for improvise, and that's pretty awesome too. And then the only other Ixalan cards are the check lands, Dragon Skull Summit, and Drowned Catacomb. Alright, let's finish up by looking at Grixis Control, another really sweet deck here. 2 copies of the Scarab God Notice, very relevant. And aside from that, you get 4 Torrential Gearhulk, so this is a control deck still running the Gearhulk, still feeling confident with that, and I think that's still fine. I mean, yes, you're going to run into Ramen Red and some Abrades here and there, but I think the card is still very, very good and very, very playable, as you can see here. Other than that, I mean, it's control, nothing too surprising. You get your Supreme Wills for those. You're going to get things like Essence Scatters, Abrades, Sweltering Suns makes it in here. So let's look at the Ixalan cards that are supplementing it. Vraska's Contempt, this time in the main, awesome, awesome removal. And yet again, search for Iskanta, Iskanta the Sunken Ruin, shows up in the deck, another really great card for control purposes. And then we'll round things out again with Dragon Skull Summit and Drowned Catacomb. So, with that being said, the tournament was pretty sweet. I'm really excited about the new meta, and I know it's only week 1. We'll have to kind of see which decks really start to filter to the top. It does get more difficult for a standard to have a really diverse set of decks that do well when you have less cards to choose from, but I'm hoping that that's not the case. I'm hoping that what we saw this week with a fair amount of variety continues on. Feels like the format is pretty awesome, and I just hope that continues as we go into week 2, week 3, and we continue to see this kind of diversity. I guess time will tell on that one. Ixalan definitely had a big splash, which it should. I mean, so many cards have rotated out that you're going to need to find cards from the new set to supplement. And that doesn't always happen, at least to this degree, because if you remember, even the last few sets that came out felt like they were making less and less of a splash on standard every time. But that's because the card pools were just getting so big. But with a smaller card pool, Ixalan definitely had a nice presence there this weekend. So I guess we'll see what goes on. I hope you found this video helpful to start thinking about what you might want to play at your LGS over the course of the next few weekends. And as this meta continues to evolve, I'll keep you updated. Like I said, barring any big news story tomorrow, my plan is going to be to do a finance video to talk about Ixalan values, because they are changing rapidly after this weekend. So we're going to zero in just on those. We'll do our normal market watch too on Saturday. So until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page, as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.